And there you have it. Those results, or that video of the delivery of the results, was posted around 5 a.m. this morning on the Government of Belize Press Office's Facebook page. And so we were able to show you that from their content that they've put out. And so the final tally that we're looking at, of course, we have Carolyn with us, who's diligently crunching those numbers. The final tallies, Carolyn, let's get into that.
It's fascinating, you know. I think when you're looking at these numbers and you remember that just recently we had a municipal elections. Yeah. And clearly from political lines, there were certain results that came out of the municipal elections. So that was kind of like the most recent litmus test to see how party lines and how parties were performing in the elections. And then now we come with the referendum, which to some extent, while ought to have been outside of the political lines, did end up with political parties taking positions of a yes and no. And so when you're watching some of the changes that have taken place, it's always great for political analysts to start asking the question, like Kevin, you know, like to say the why, how, and so on and so forth. But I thought it was very interesting when you started to look at some of the numbers. But to kind of summarize what the Chief Elections Officer has said, clearly there were 31 constituencies that went out, that where voting took place for the referendum. There were 97,119 voters, of which 53,388 or 54.9% carried the yes position, and 43,029 or 44.3% carried the no position, and then we had a 0.8% where votes were spoiled or rejected. And so that averages to about 55% to about 44%, which is what we were saying.
I was going to say, that was what we were using all night.
All night, and it kind of maintained that here and there, but it maintained that. Yeah. In terms of the 31 constituencies, 22 constituencies, as we have said, carried the yes, and 9 constituencies carried the no. And the 9 constituencies that carried the no can be very interesting because when you are looking at some of the dynamics that were taking place, there were certain expectations that constituencies on the border, for example, would have voted differently, perhaps because they're close to the border and the linkages between Belize and Guatemala. Yeah. And in the south, that came true because both Toledo East and Toledo West voted no. In the West, we had Cayo West, which is right on the border, and Cayo North voting no or carrying the no position. Yeah. It would be interesting to find out what transpired in Corozal and Orange Walk, because in Corozal Bay and in Corozal Southeast, again the no was carried, and in Orange Walk Central and Orange Walk North, the no was carried. So what took place within Orange Walk and Corozal? Of course, the party leader for the People's United Party comes out of Orange Walk, and the party's position was a no. And so there may be some linkages with all that. But that in itself was very interesting. Now, in terms of the variance, surprisingly, Belize Rural Central had the highest margin in terms of the yes and no carrying, had the highest margin for a yes with 1,245 votes for a yes. In terms of the no, Toledo West carried the highest margins with 334 votes. So you see there's a clear disparity between the margin for the highest for the constituency that carried the yes and that which carried the no. In terms of the least variance, we're looking at Orange Walk South, which was 111, and they carried a yes, and Coruscant Bay, which was 102, which carried a no.
Let me just jump in here so we can unpack as best we can some of the results based on different observations. So I like where you started in looking at some of the surprising results. And I think that's really where we should jump in, because there were definitely some areas where collectively, as we were receiving the results, that were surprising. So, and of course, this is still a panel conversation in terms of yesterday's format.
And let me also say there's a lot more analysis behind the numbers that have to be done.
So, do we want to start with voter turnout and registration, or do we want to go into surprising results?
I would like to take a look at the voter
turnout. Okay, let's do that.
I thought that in itself, 66.8%. If one would look generally in terms of the normal process of an election, that may have been considered more or less acceptable.
Definitely.
But I
on
think
the lower end.
But I think in terms of a re-registration that recently happened, and considering when you saw the last re-registration, which 90% came out. So this in itself can also have some whys behind it. But in terms of meeting a percentage beyond the clear majority, I think is a good thing. Because when you're looking at 66% of the population coming out to vote, that is telling you 2/3 of your population came out to vote. Very important issue. And I think that in itself is good, because there was always the issue, if you recall, that conversation where initially there was a simple majority of 50 plus 1, and then there was a change in the Referendum Act to do 60% threshold, and then there was a back to the simple majority. So when we look at, say, 66% of the population coming out, I think that in itself sends a signal that it is not just a majority, but clearly more than what one would want with a simple majority. And I think that's a great story for Belize that 66% came out.
Well,
does this reinforce the need to, or the importance of not changing the periods for re-registration? Because if you, and I'm very uncomfortable with the narrative that it's a reflection of the partisan political forces. It's very difficult for me to swallow. But if we accept that for argument's sake, then take, for example, Coruscant Bay. The margin for victory for the Minister of Health was very slim. And then we had re-registration, and then now we have a new vote coming out. So the political pundits might be musing to say, okay, well, if the voter list had been clean before, then that seat would not have gone that way. Of course, the same sheep were cut, the same knife that cut sheep.
Yeah, it could work in different aspects.
But I think that is a very interesting analysis of Coruscant Bay, because in that area, the margins were just so small. And it swung after you had a registration.
And it was an easy swing. You know, it was an easy swing. Again, like I said, and this is where some of the whys come in, because when you look, like, for example, at Belize City, if you want to take Belize City, for example, here you recently had a municipal election where constituencies like Port Loyola, Pigstock, Caribbean Shores, these were all constituencies that came out big, you know, for the PUP, and Lake Independence at the end of the day. Now, when we look now at the referenda, what we're seeing, only Lake Independence came out with the followed through on the no carriage with the no platform, and even with that, that was only by a margin of 295 votes. And so these are some of the interesting things that one would want to look at and say, you know, what happened. But I also believe that to a lot of extent, what you're also seeing is a kind of independent voting surge as well. You kept hearing and seeing the vote your conscience. I think one of the best things I remember the Prime Minister had said at the very onset when this referendum came out, if you had recalled, he had said, he would instruct that they vote their conscience, even though they took a change from that conscience. But I think people went deep into their conscience on this, and I think it is not in it, to my mind, it does not answer all the questions, but I think it can answer some of the questions when you're seeing some of these changes that have taken place in a short space of time.
So as you said, the voter turnout, 66.8 of what is the new total number of registered voters, which is 148,500.
That's right.
And I know that one of the things, you know, Kevin, we were saying that yesterday, is looking at the change in the referendum act. Had it not been changed, and we had this same turnout, it would have been a valid referendum, because it would have met the threshold of 60%. And I think that's something that we've all observed.
And I think it does validate to some extent that perhaps there was a reason for putting that threshold within, and in this particular case, as with the Constitution, and we keep always say that, there's a reason why when there's going to be a constitutional amendment, there are certain provisions that it requires 3/4, because it's not just about a simple majority. You want to be convinced. You want to be, what one would say, without a doubt. There will always be a minority. It's rare you're going to have all people agreeing on in a democratic, and that is what democracy is about. That's what makes democracy robust and healthy, where you can have different views, different places and spaces to share those views, and the referendum is just one.
And I think that making the observation that we exceeded the 60% threshold is one thing, but I also think a key point at looking at the overall voter turnout is also that it would be deemed as low, and I wanted to talk about that just a little bit more, so we can understand.
I would look at it more low in the context of having a recent re-registration.
Yeah, that's what I'm getting to, because and we heard from the Prime Minister in looking at what his expectations were in terms of turnout, is that because of the very same experience in previous re-registration, that the voter turnout was so high for an election following the last re-registration exercise, that there was an assumption or perhaps a hope that it was going to be in similar trend, but it did not follow through with that.
But currently these numbers are pretty high in terms of voter turnout, you know. I really think it was, I don't want to go too far, but it was, I want to say high, but it was higher than, look at some of these numbers, 80% in Albert, 83%
but see, that's why I'm saying, like, the differentiation I'm saying here is 67% in general would be a good result.
Exactly.
But I'm just saying, if you compare 67% turnout to what is expected after, or what we saw in the last re-registration exercise, that's the comparison being made. I think clearly,
not necessarily that by itself. Taken by itself, the 67% is, to my mind, is a good turnout. You always want as much people to come out and vote. The higher the voter percentage turnout, the more you feel your population is engaged in terms of the decision making.
There are two things. One, look at the Guatemalan percentage in terms of, it was 26%? 27 coming out. That's one. And two, from all the analysts, political analysts, even the politicians, they were looking at somewhere between 50%. And everybody thought that was being a bit liberal in looking at the pace of what was coming out. So when you get to almost 70%, that's...
Well, and I also...
Well, then again, remember, go back to the point that we kept harping yesterday, that the unpredictability and the uncertainty of this particular referenda. Because if you look, for example, at Queen's Square, which had the highest voter turnout at 83.9 or 84%. That is phenomenal. That is almost near where the 90%, which was what transpired in the re-registration process, the election post the re-registration in 1998. But then let us look at the lowest, which is Toledo East, which was 57.5%. You know, Yet one would have thought that the issue because of the South and the fact that there were some expectations which came true, that the border communities would have voted no. Then what was it that have them at the bottom of the ladder? And Queen Square, now we know Queen Square, of course, is the home of the Prime Minister and the constituents. So clearly there was a lot on the line in terms of Queen Square. And then if you look at even Pickstock, had a very impressive, in my 74%, which again is the constituency of the foreign minister. So you're beginning to see, to my mind, some constituencies that are really impressive. Now, when it goes back to the point you made, where the analysts and the expectations of 50, and I think you may recall my saying I had greater expectations, because when you said it yesterday, I said no. I said I think we're not giving the Belizean people enough credit. I think sometimes we tend to want to box our people, you know, and tie up some little knots and define our people. And our people from time to time have said to us, you know, we can speak, and this is how we speak. And I had expectations of more than 50, and I said it. I being the optimist, so hoping it would have been higher. I wanted it, because I wanted it to be higher, because I thought it was such a fundamental issue. And we must not discount that 34% that did not come out to vote. Neither should we discount the fact that we had a significant number of persons who we don't know what transpired. Remember, there were some 55,000 persons that did more or less, but we don't know how much of that actually is legible, would qualify to meet that list.
Or to put it another way, how many people chose not to re-register for the referendum.
But 67% is an excellent, And
I think one of the things that we have to keep on saying and keep on reminding ourselves, any analysis that is made on this referendum is putting, it is really two different beings, two different animals. The referendum is a different exercise from an election. And we are relying on the statistics and the data and the trends that we see with elections, because that's really all we have to go by. But this is an anomaly on its own. And I'm not saying that some of the election trends perhaps don't match the referendum, but also I think you can't just assume the whys of the election also result in the whys of what we're seeing with the referendum.
And you may add also that perhaps for the first time in our history, we have to my mind, there were some constituencies or some leaders within constituencies who kind of adopted the more let the people decide. So you did have some leaders in constituency who did not necessarily go what I would call full frontal on either platforms, and they felt that it was best for their constituency to vote, their particular.
Those were all in the opposition, though.
Pardon me?
Those were all in opposition. All the government representatives did come out very solid. And
so we want to get into some of the surprising results. I know that's part of what we want to discuss this morning. But before we do, when we look at the breakdown of where there were constituencies that voted no, in Belize City, there was only one. But there were two in Belize District. But Belize City, there was only one. There was only one in all of Belize District. And that was in Lake Independence. So what we do have are some interviews that we conducted yesterday. And so we're going to start off by, we're going to pull up the interview that we did with Cordell Hyde, if you can get that one together, so we can get an insight as to what he was saying during the course of the day. Honorable Cordell Hyde, and I remember reflecting on this interview, and we were saying, the spirits were a bit tempered.
I look at it from again going back to it's a historic first time that we're really seeing people beginning to appreciate. I think that you can have a view that may be different from that of your political party.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that in itself is good,
Yeah.
because oftentimes we keep putting these thoughts out regarding the way we are governed, where everything is party politics, and let us not fool ourselves. Even the great United States are drawing down the line between the Democrats and the Republicans, you know. So it's no.
Yeah.
But I think the whole way in which we have been governed historically has always been, everything is just really divided down that party line.
Yeah.
And I think this election was a bit, even though at the very end it became a yes and no from both political parties, I think there was still an introduction of the independence and the independent voting within that landscape. So do we have?
So do we have the video ready? No, we're still waiting to pull up some of those files.
That is an important point, because to me it goes back to our government, because this whole thing of you have to vote what your party's position is, I think should be thrown out the window.
Yeah.
Because if we had gone to the House, there should be a correlation between what the era rep's position is and what the results of the referendum are.
That's right.
I know Marlene was commenting on it yesterday on air about, you know, the national consultation campaign done by the opposition, because the result after that was
moving
a no.
towards a no. Yeah.
But if you look at the vote, it appears that it was not a
exactly.
true feeler.
Well,
so that disconnect.
Yeah.
And maybe perhaps.
So the only person who really for the only person really for the opposition who can say, listen, I was in tune with exactly what my people were saying, is really Cordell.
Yes.
Well, we didn't get the Cordell video ready yet, but we do.
Sorry.
Since you
No,
mentioned,
sorry,
since you
also-
mentioned leader of the opposition, we have that video. Let's
no,
take a
Mike, Rekenya.
Yeah, Mike.
Yes,
Yes.
Mike Espat, Rekenya, because the Toledo's.
Toledo went
Kayonart,
Yes.
which Michelle
Michelle
Oshibat
Shabat.
is there with Coruscant Bay, Coruscant Southeast.
Yes.
So let's go to the
Monche,
video that was
Margon
done
Cervantes, Monche Cervantes,
during the day
Side
in
Musa.
Orange Walk. In Orange Walk with Hippolyta Novella and the leader of the opposition, John Briceño.
I think for George,
The opposition and Orange Walk Central Representative John Briceño. Mr. Briceño, you've cast your vote now. How does it feel?
Well, as always, it's always a thrill to go and cast your vote in any election, and especially in this one, in this referendum, one that that can transcend party politics. You know, this is probably one of the most important elections or referendum that we're having since 1981. So you get that thrill, you get that sense of occasion, a sense of history that's in the making.
In terms of the PUP's machinery, especially here in Orange Central, how is that going on so far?
I think we're doing fairly well. Initially I felt that the voter turnout would have been lower. I was thinking that probably the voter turnout was going to be probably around 40%. But from the looks of it, at least in Orange Walk Central, we are probably around 27, probably we've hit already 28%. We are slightly above the national average. I think the national average is around 25%. So we feel good. We feel very good about that. The people are responding, that the people are understanding that this is a very important referendum. It's a very important decision for them to make. And so I am quite pleased and I feel a sense of gratification that people have felt it important to come out and vote.
Have you visited in your division in terms of the crowd there, the presence of
Well,
voters?
yes, I've been in 3 polling areas. I've been in San Esteban and also in San Francisco. And it's a constant, not long lines, but they're constant coming in. You know, I say you're trickling, and you fill the bucket, no? And that's exactly what is happening right now. The process is peaceful. Nobody's harassing one another. I think people have already made up their mind. They came already with their minds determined. That's why for us here in our camp here in Orange Walk Central, our people that are working, we said we're not going to use party colors, we're not going to be no PUP flags. This is about Belize. and we need to respect one another for whichever way we decide to vote.
However, the party's campaigners will still be asking or trying to convince voters to vote no today.
Well, as like anybody that asks us for what they believe we should be doing, then of course then we tell them. We have our street captains that are out there picking up the people that need to come out. Many people come out on their own, but there are a few people that need assistance, that they can't walk well, or they're in a hurry, so you have to quickly bring them to vote and then go back. And as always, like in every election, you try to convince your voters right to the very end, before they cross the 100-yard line to go and vote.
At this moment, what is the message that you guys are bringing across to the voters as they go in to cast their vote?
Well, the message has been simple, that we believe that we should vote no, that there are still a lot of unanswered questions. A lot of people believe that someday we may have to go to the ICJ. But what they're saying but whenever we make that decision, it is because all of the answers all of the questions have been answered, so that they can feel that they have all of the information for them to make an informed decision. There are still a lot of people that still have a lot of question marks, and they're not too sure. And because they're not too sure, they're saying, well, I won't risk my country, and I might as well go and vote no, because I'm not sure.
Will you be traveling across the country to different divisions?
Not for this one. It's kind of difficult, and no, I will be probably here in Orange Walk Central. I'll probably be going visiting the people in Orange Walk East and in Orange Walk North later this afternoon, and maybe even go to Yo Creek, because it's all within the area. Like for the town council, I went all over trying to visit as many municipalities. But today I'm going to concentrate more of my time here in Orange Walk.
Have you been notified of any challenges or issues that voters are having in terms of the process today?
Well, it has been going fairly smoothly, and it's a good thing, because we had a lot of concerns. I mean, for instance, the voters list, we did not get the official voters list until yesterday, I think after 10. So it did not give you enough time to be able to study it carefully. There have been some issues across the country where people have been telling us that they have their voters card, their voters ID, but yet their name on the list. So we've asked the Secretariat to document those cases, so that whenever after the elections, we want to study it and see if it is really a serious issue, and then if it is, then obviously we'll have to be meeting with the officials at the Elections and Boundaries Department.
At the end of the day, what in your opinion, you believe what the voter turnout will be across the country high, or do you believe it will be low? It
is going to be higher than I expected, as I said, because it is not municipal elections or general elections. It's but it's a very important referendum. But we felt that probably people would not feel that urge, that is very important for our vote. But obviously over the past few weeks, especially with the loss of the government, when they lost in the Supreme Court, when it was, when the Chief Justice was an injunction, that I believe raised the consciousness about what's taking place in the referendum. A lot of people are not really following it, but when they say court, they stop, and then a lot of back and forth of that. I think that kind of helped to be able to increase the awareness of the referendum, to come out and vote, and I believe that had a positive impact on the outcome. Because of that, I believe that we are going to have more than 50% voter turnout. In Orange Walk Central, we probably will be hitting around 60%, maybe more. In many instances, people come out in the afternoon. So we'll be looking at all of that, and we will continue to encourage as many people to come out and vote. It is important for every single citizen to come out and vote. This is not about party politics, and so some people are coming to say, well, I need a refund because I need to pay my gas. Well, I say, listen, this is Belize. This is about your country, and that is why it is important for every single Belizean that is registered to come out to vote. So, I know you're on live, and we are also live on Fiesta. I take this opportunity to continue to urge Belizeans to come out and to vote. This is very important. It is one of the most important decisions we are going to be making since independence.
So the voters list after the re-registration exercise has about 140,000 plus names compared to the previous list, which was over 200,000 names. Do you believe that this list is the true representation of the electorate?
I still think there are still some people that are left to be registered. You know, a lot of people like to leave registering for the last moment. You know, for there's an election coming up. I've seen it in Orange Rock Central sometimes over a summer break. We would send some people to check out sign it, and a few months later, when municipal elections are coming or general elections, and I would suspect probably as much as 20% or more people are left to be registered.
My last question, where will you be when the results or the counting is happening? Will you stay tuned in to Channel 5 or other stations? And will the PUP call a press conference immediately after or tomorrow to support the results, or what have you?
Do you want to put me in trouble, Polo, to say which TV station I'll be watching?
You can watch your own, but I'm saying, will you be attentive to the results?
I will results. I will be here in Orange Rock, and we expect to speak to the media as soon as the results are out. Anyway it goes, whether it goes yes or no, to give our perspective and to thank all the voters that came out to vote.
Thank you very much, Leader of the Opposition. That was John Briceño, Area Representative of Orange Rock Central. So Mr. Beno said that he would be going to other polling station and areas to check out how he's been going. He's expecting a high turnout per se in terms of this new list. He's saying that compared to the previous list, there are some people who did not manage to be registered on time for this election. So there to have it, Leader of the Opposition, John Briceño, will be continue roaming throughout the day and of course providing live updates for yes.
So there we heard, we have the good timestamp there to help us out at about 1:30, and that was Leader of the Opposition, John Briceño, speaking with our correspondent there, News 5 reporter Hipólito Novello. I'm very sure we'll probably be hearing from them, hopefully today,
In the course of the day.
a response to the results and how things panned out. Yeah. And let's look at Orange Walk in the meantime, since we are here.
Yeah.
Well, Orange Walk again went. It was in terms of the no and the yes carrying.
Yeah.
It was two and two. So they split. Again, Coruscant and Orange Walk literally did the same thing in terms of splitting. The two carrying the no and two carrying the yes. No. But I think some of the ones which I think, again, when we were having the discussion as to noteworthy in terms of if you were a strong force behind a no campaign. Let us look at Kaya South.
Yes.
Yeah.
For example, Kaya South area representative was a strong force behind the no campaign. Yet within that constituency, the yes carried. But then when you look at the turnout of that constituency, it was only 59%.
Which is still high.
So you're talking about 40% of the voters didn't come out. But not only that, it only carried by 233.
Okay.
So there have been maybe some other issues. For example, Toledo West, which were able to carry through their platform of a no. They were up by 334. Their turnout was only 60%. So I think one of the issues Kevin had raised yesterday had a lot to do with things like mobilization. Are we ready for the interview?
Yeah. Well, I think that's a perfect segue because very early in the morning, when Terry G caught up with the CEO in the Office of the Prime Minister, Audrey Wallace, I think the question of mobilization was one that came up very early in the day. So let's take a look at that. This was fresh in the morning, 8:50 a.m.
Okay, Terry G here, folks. Once again, we're live on 5 and we're in front of Evangel Credit Union, which is right next to EP York polling area number 3 for the Caribbean Shores Division. And we're with Audrey Wallace. She's the CEO in the Office of the Prime Minister. Good morning.
Good morning, good morning.
So what are you guys doing out here today with this vote yes propaganda that we're seeing displaying on the
Okay, so if you read it, doesn't say vote yes at all. It says
Sorry.
It says
And you
vote.
did correct me at the front, you know, Audrey, with your vote for and then the map of Belize. My humble apologies, Audrey.
Yeah, so this is vote for Belize. So let me just say what is happening. This is the Caribbean Shores UDP tent that we have here. What has happened is that the referendum unit has been doing a campaign, an education campaign nationwide, non-partisan, just to get awareness. And the United Democratic Party has stated from day one that this was a non-partisan. While the party was supporting a yes vote, we understand that people will make a decision on their own. And so today we have carried on with that. So today in the Caribbean Shores area, it's vote for Belize. The Caribbean Shores voters, they will make up their own minds whether they're going yes or no. And we are carrying on that spirit to just encourage as many people as possible to come out and exercise their right today.
What are you anticipating in terms of a voter turnout? Maybe based on your groundwork that you have done before this day.
Yes, I think since there's been re-registration, there's usually naturally a higher percentage of voter turnout because you have a cleaned up list. If I have to be honest, I think before we went through all of the injunction debacle, I expected that there would be a higher voter turnout. I think people got into confusion with all the wranglings that we're all exposed to. But I believe that this is just me, I'm anticipating maybe a 65% turnout, voter turnout across the country.
And what are you doing to ensure that people turn out en masse?
Yeah, so what we have been doing, what I am doing certainly in the Caribbean Shores area, again, we have called every single voter that we were able to get phone numbers for and encouraged them to come out and offered support for them to get to the polls if they couldn't. Sometimes the elderly have some issues. Sometimes people are coming in from the Keys and they want to be picked up from the airport. So we have organized all of that typical machinery to assist voters to get to the poll. Across the country, I am sure that the United Party is doing the same thing to encourage and to mobilize. Today is about getting out the vote. And so the party machinery is always very helpful on days like this. And so we have continued to work very hard, reaching out to voters, getting them information, and doing our best to bring them out as best we can.
We certainly hope that you're successful in your endeavors. Audrey Wallace, her day job, folks, is she's the CEO in the Office of the Prime Minister. Today, she's working tirelessly, doing yeoman's work or yeoman's work from the early onset to ensure that you come out en masse and vote for Belize. We'll continue to be your eyes and ears around the folks. Terry G on the MIC.
All right, and there we had it. That was an early morning interview with CEO Audrey Wallace, done by Terry G there, an update. And I think we entered into that video, we went to that video talking about mobilization. And I think that's going to be one of the questions that people, or in terms of the analysis of how things unfolded, mobilization efforts will be one.
And the post-analysis is, as we had said earlier regarding a referenda, when you are hopeful that it ought not to be drawn along political lines, but really that the opportunity should be given to all persons who wishing to vote, regardless of location, economic status, or whatever, that they can get that opportunity. I think this may have been also a testing ground as to what we may need to do next time to ensure that perhaps we have a higher turnout, higher than normal turnout. And so I think that was good.
Just a mischievous question in terms of, do you think, speculating, that under the old voters list, that the yes vote would have still carried?
I believe so. I think there are a lot of issues, and there's a lot of issues and factors that one has to take into consideration. And we can go on ad nauseum on these issues. But I think we spoke of issues of mobilization, which could have affected different areas in varying instances. The rural areas, as we have mentioned, may have been more affected than the urban areas, and so you tend to have seen higher percentage turnout in the urban areas vis-a-vis the rural areas. Also, be mindful that there are many persons who live in rural areas who also work in tourist resorts and so on and so forth. So there are key issues as to how you get people in to do that voting. Another issue has to do with the messaging.
Yes,
what works for which groupings of people. Yes, there were lots of concerns about trust issues and the whole process of confidence in the process because of many of the deficiencies and flaws that came out, whether it had to do with the vital statistics issue, whether it had to do with the re-registration process of data being lost and so on and so forth. But I think at the end of the day, people were able to pull out what was important for them, what message resonated with them, what message they could have trusted and felt safe. And I think different groupings had different messaging. Clearly, the campaign for the yes was very strategic in the audiences that it targeted. Because if you noted, and I can only go by what I observed, whether it was on the news or social media, you saw them target youths, universities, you saw them target the working force. So they were in many offices and institutions, big institutions, whether it was government departments, whether it was utility companies, whether it was private companies. So they were targeting a certain segment of that population. So clearly, for that yes narrative, that kind of messaging resonated. Now, what resonated perhaps with the no voters, perhaps, and we mentioned issues like the safety then becomes an issue of the border communities, for example. That may have been an issue there. But we really have to be mindful that different things work for different people.
And that's an important juncture for me, because when you look at, there are certain things that I just couldn't logically put together. For example, and this is just my breakdown of it. To me, the same messaging and targeting in terms of demographics that applied successfully in Lake Eye for Cordell Hyde, the Honorable Cordell Hyde, ought to have similarly played out to some degree for Port Loyola, because it's almost the same demographics. They're almost, to me, those two constituencies to me are like twins. And it didn't. Look, for example, again, in terms of the messaging that surely applied in Corozal Bay. You would think that in Corozal North, that the same thing would apply. Just geographically, would make that prejudicial assumption, wrongfully so. Then again, look at the messaging that was, and the work put in the South by Toledo East and Toledo West. That should have, based on the way they grouped themselves together, should apply the same way for Stan Creek and for Rodwell and Dr. Zabani, but it absolutely didn't.
And again, go back, look at the dynamics and different things which may affect. Let us look at a Stan Creek, Dangriga, for example. Dangriga is a society. Dangriga is a society that has high respect for its elderly, and it's a strong Garifuna community. And so some key Garifuna personalities came out in support of that yes vote. So that in itself was a great messaging there. Within Stan Creek West, there is also a high percentage of foreign-born population. When you look at areas like the Placencia area and the St. Bite area, Maya Center, there is a lot of foreign-born population who resonated with that yes. But if you look at if I wanted to look at, let us say, Lake Independence, you spoke about Lake Independence vis-a-vis Port Loyola. In Lake Independence, people have a relationship with Cordell Hyde. Let us not discount that relationship. They believe in Cordell, the Honorable Cordell Hyde. And so to my mind, that could have factored into their belief as well as, like you said, the kind of messaging that came out. So the messaging was linked to my belief. I believe in the messenger and the message.
I was going to say, it seems that it was a two-part process. It's who the messenger and exactly who you're talking to.
So it's different dynamics, and this is why, like I say, when you start going behind the why, but at the end of the day, it always boils down to to my mind, that trust issue.
Yeah.
The voter wants to feel that they can connect.
Yeah.
They want something that resonates with them. They want to believe in something.
Yeah.
And I think the Yes campaign, to some extent, gave them that route, that safe route. You know, that I can trust this process, because if we don't do this process, what else? And perhaps the No campaign was unable to say what next, you know. And then don't discount the fact that the proponents of the No campaign, many of them were also part of the campaign as a member of a political party that initiated the whole process. And so you had key people within that party also saying that we are prepared to go that route.
That also lends to one of the things we heard consistently yesterday, which was the issue of people are confused.
Yes.
And I really think that that's one of the things that we'll have to discuss a bit further. But since you're on the topic of Honorable Cordell Hyde, we do have that interview with him that was conducted during the course of the day, and that was done by Bisani Caetano. So let's take a look at that now.
We're here in front of the Lake Independence St. Martin's Primary School. We're joined by the Honorable Cordell Hyde for Lake Independence. Good morning, Mr. Hyde. Begin by talking to us, sir, about the movement of voters within this constituency. It's a fairly large constituency, and there's a certain percentage, I'm assuming, that you're expecting that will turn out today to vote.
Well, it's always hard for me to predict how many people are going to come out. We always try to push as hard as we can to make sure that we get out a maximum amount of voters, because ultimately you want as many people to vote as is possible. It's not like a general election. This is a different animal, different sum that we've ever seen, and so we are pushing. It's been steady, but we still have a long ways to go. I mean, we've not even reached a halfway point. You know, it's a marathon, so we'll see how it shakes out.
This constituency, as we've come to understand, has thousands of registered and eligible voters. In terms of being able to do the door-to-door and sharing with them the message, in this case of your party, what was that like, and what was some of the responses that you've gotten from constituencies of Lake Eyre?
To be truthful, we were not able to cover this division like we normally would in our general elections. It just wasn't possible. We didn't have that kind of campaign. But we spoke to a lot of people, and people are generally confused, generally uncertain as to what to do. The issue had been over their heads to some extent, and you know, they were just getting a wrong-sided view of how things were going, and so we've had to try to balance that. And I think our people really want to make the right decision ultimately. And that's the most unfortunate thing, because if we were in a position where we had a more balanced campaign and we had more time and take away the stress and the intensity and the uncertainty of the situation, then I think that people would have grasped the information better and would have been far more comfortable today than they are. I've never seen a situation, in all the 25 years I've been in politics, I've never seen a situation where the people are so uncertain. Even on the day they're uncertain. They don't know quite what to do. Usually people very early know exactly what they're going to do, and they go all in on that. But with this issue, they were tentative. But you know, ultimately, I believe in the collective wisdom of people. I feel like ultimately people always get it right collectively. And so I think that's what you're going to see at the end of the day.
If at the end of the day there is overwhelmingly a yes vote, what do you, as the area representative for Lake Independence, do in terms of either preparing yourself to work with your constituents as they move forward to the ICJ?
On a yes vote? Man, we would be in uncharted territory. If we don't know this animal now, I don't know that we're going to know that animal later. So it's going to be interesting. I'm not thinking that far ahead. I'm focusing on today and looking forward to tomorrow. Actually, looking forward to a stress-free day where this whole referendum talking is not hanging over our heads. You know, it's been stressful for a lot of people. Because we hate to see our people in this kind of situation where they're so uncertain and so tentative on it. But you know, whatever the people decide, ultimately we have to respect, and because that is what democracy is about. Democracy is about giving voice to the people and counting as many of their voices and their votes as is possible, and what they decide, we have to live with, and we have to support.
So on the flip side of that question then, so if there's a resounding no at the end of the day, what does your mandate include as the representative of the people of Lake Independence?
But I think we have to start preparing our people for nation building. I think we've spent the last 37 years kind of sleepwalking through independence. We've taken certain things for granted, and all of a sudden we realize that, you know what, life isn't so simple. Nobody's going to come across the nobody's going to send their children across the seas to come and defend us. We have to defend ourselves. We have to think strategically as to how we can be better defenders of our territorial integrity. That means thinking outside the box. We have to make sure that our very, very, very best people are in diplomacy, because I think in a lot of instances we've been overmatched, and we have to start thinking how we can strategically just be better and be better prepared to persevere, to endure, to work hard and make sacrifice. George Price and Philip Colson is not going to appear suddenly, but we have to support those national heroes, cherish their values and support what they stood for, and be prepared to defend that with everything we've got. And I don't think that we've been there. I think we've just taken certain things for granted. And I think it's about ensuring now that our people open their eyes and try to be better prepared to embrace nationhood in this time. The task of nation building is, as George Price once said, is for giants. But I think we've misled our people some. You know, we think like we can just, you know, get out of it, you know. Like they say to young people, well, we want to solve this issue for young people, and we want to get this out of the way. But at the end of the day, if our generation is not able to solve it, we have to have the confidence that our children and our grandchildren will be able to, and we have to prepare them for that. We can't keep feeling like there's an escape hatch somewhere. We have to start thinking, how exactly are we going to be better? Be more strategic, be smarter with our national security and our national defense, and ensure that we never ever lose a square centimeter, a blade of grass, or a grain of sand of this country. Because if we were to do that, then we will be betraying the memory and the ideals and the values of our national heroes, you know.
Isani Cayetano for coverage of the referendum, the ICJ referendum 2019, coming to you guys live from St. Martin's Primary School in the Lake Independence constituency.
All right, and there we had, that was an interview earlier in the day with Honorable Cordell Hyde, and it is the only constituency in the entire Belize district that had a no vote over.
And remember when we spoke earlier yesterday, where we spoke of the fact that the Belize district had almost 1/3 the voting bloc, which is about 30%. And that tells you everything, because if you have in Coruscant, for example, it went 2 for 2. In Orange Walk, it went 2 for 2. In Cayo, it went 2 and 4. In Stan Creek, it went 2
yes.
for the yes. In Toledo, it went 2
no.
for the no. But in Belize district, where you had 13 constituencies, only 1 constituency carried the no, 12 constituencies carried the yes, and that represented 30% of the vote. And that's why we kept saying, if you recall yesterday, that Belize district Belize district is going to be the determining factor.
Yeah.
And after that, Cayo. But Cayo went...
because we were looking at the percentages of what
because it was an aggregate, it was the aggregate vote. But going back to Cayo West, which again is another noteworthy constituency, because Cayo West, which has been dominated by United Democratic Party politics, the Honorable Erwin Contreras, which it is said, interestingly, the voters list, it is alleged, it is alleged, and I think I can say this, it is alleged that there are a significant number of persons of Guatemalan birth on the voters list of Cayo West, yet Cayo West voted no. No, the no vote carried in a dominant United Democratic Party constituency. So this referendum, like I said, there's so much that you can go into the whys. And that would be, there are some constituencies that, as you said, you really want to dwell a little bit
Yeah.
more. Kaya West is one of those constituencies.
And I think that's key. Let's look at some of the noteworthy results. And I know one of the things you were saying, Kevin, is that you were not surprised by Fort George, right?
Absolutely not. It can't be that I tell them I'm going to stand up and I stand up, and the people I say are going to stand up with me stand up, and then that's a surprise.
Yeah.
The past Prime Minister said, listen, I am a yes. His constituency, there's a connect. There's those people who got up and said no and the constituency said yes. There's a disconnect between them and their constituency. They obviously didn't know or misspoke, or there's some disconnect. It's clear that Mr. Musa knows Fort George.
Yeah. And I think the degree of disconnect can perhaps be discussed, because again, like I said, if you look at the Stan Creek West, where clearly the area representative was a strong no. His platform was a strong no.
Yeah.
His percentage turnout was 62%, and the yes carried by 354 votes.
Yeah.
But then you had 38% of the population didn't coming to vote. So I wouldn't call it, in some instances where you see those kinds of low percentage, it may not necessarily have been a disconnect as much as perhaps the inability to mobilize and get the voters out, which of course becomes in a campaign machinery flaw that one has to take a look at, because at the end of the day, I always go back to what they continue to say. If 3 people persons go to vote and 2 say yes,
2 win.
2 and 1 say no, the 2 will win. But but when it comes to Fort George, I think what happened in Fort George constituency too, for the political pundits, it was interesting, because here you have the former Prime Minister, area representative, former 2 times Prime Minister, going on record basically supporting the government position, and as
to the ire of his own party.
Yeah, to the ire of his own party. On that yes platform. Then the chairman of the party has been on the carrying the no platform for the party, but the chairman of the party again had to carry the platform of the party, because he's representing the party. Because when the party took a position, he then had to take forward that position, and so that would be interesting dynamics, because he is also the chairman of the party, happens to be the chair who runs the Fort George machinery, and so clearly, going back to what you said, and it's like the Cordell scenario as well, the Honorable Cordell Hyde, they have a link and a relationship.
Yeah. All right, well, we have a couple more noteworthy results that we want to discuss. We're just going to go ahead and take a very quick break, and we'll be back in a few. Stay tuned.
For over 20 years, Great Belize Television, Channel 5, has been the leader in award-winning local programming. We have also produced some of the best video commercials, documentaries, and live events for clients countrywide. And we continue to offer high-quality production services to maximize your advertising needs for your business or organization. From concept to completion, let us help you achieve your marketing goal by producing your commercial, documentary, graphic animation, live event, or even designing your website. Using state-of-the-art equipment and experienced personnel, we can make your ideas come alive. For more information, come see us on Coney Drive or give us a call at 223-0146 or 223-7781 or email us at gbtv@btl.net. Great Belize Productions, making great television in Belize.
All right, and continuing with our recap of yesterday's historic decision. Before the break, we were looking at some of the noteworthy results and also flashback. We're doing a flashback to some of the interviews from yesterday. One of the interviews we want to bring back for you, and we'll get that lined up in just a bit, was a conversation with the Prime Minister later on in the evening. And I think this really will set the backdrop for some of the points we want to make now. We are expecting a press conference by the Prime Minister this morning, so you will be able to get a look at that as well. So this is what he had to say yesterday afternoon.
Yes, welcome back. We are here in front of the Buttonwood Bay Nazarene Primary School in Belize City, and I have been joined by Prime Minister Dean Barrow, who's going to share a few words with us firstly on how things have been progressing throughout the day in terms of today's referendum. Good evening, PM.
Good evening. Progressing well enough. I would have liked a bigger turnout. Belize City is doing well enough, but I'm afraid that's not the case. The last reports I saw in the rest of the country. But everything, as I understand it, is peaceful. And so we will once again, I think, cross the finish line with our image and reputation intact in terms of being past masters at knowing how to run an election, whether it's a general election, municipal election, or a referendum, in a manner that's free, fair, transparent, and without violence.
When you look at the turnout, as you're saying, it's somewhat dismal. Could it have been perhaps better if there was a bipartisan approach that would have perhaps served to draw more people to come out and vote today?
Well, I'm sure, but unfortunately that's not the way things turned out, so there it is.
What are we looking at in terms of perhaps a last-minute push to 6 o'clock, either from your side or from any other machinery that's mobilizing?
In all sides are doing precisely that, making that last-ditch effort. And so, the numbers will clearly go up, although I don't think to the extent, there's not enough time. Clearly not to the extent that I would have liked to have seen. But we're going to be all right. Just not the kind of bumper performance that I would have wished for with respect to something as fundamental as this, where the stakes are so absolutely high, where quite literally the future of the country is in the balance. But there it is.
What would you attribute, if there were one thing to point to, what would you attribute the lack of turnout to? Would it be perhaps the many hiccups leading up to today's referendum date?
I'm sure the postponement of the original date, from the original date, had something to do with it, but not a great deal in my view. I don't want to put a foot wrong, but really, there are simply too many people who can't be bothered. They see all elections as being the same. There's a degree to which the electorate is jaded, and I just don't think that the effort was made to distinguish between normal course elections and this all-important referendum. So it's a pity, but we'll have to live with what the situation is.
I know you've said this repeatedly, but there are still lingering concerns among voters as to what happens tomorrow either way.
Well, we pick ourselves up and we move forward. If it is a yes vote, government will try to go to the National Assembly within a week, week and a half, 2 weeks at the most, to amend the Maritime Areas Act, and then we lodge the notice of our formal, the result and our formal submission to the ICJ jurisdiction. If it is a no vote, we strategize in terms of going forward in a manner that will continue to try to do its best to protect the sovereignty of Belize. There'll be some explaining to do in terms of the international community, but I keep saying that while there will be disappointment there, if there's a yes vote, it's not as though that community will simply cut us off. And to the extent that we will have to work a little harder to persuade the international community to continue to support us as ardently as it has in the past, well, we'll have to get to it and make that extra effort, because the sovereignty, the territorial integrity of Belize will always require, if we're not to go to court to get a binding resolution, will always require a continued diplomatic push to ensure that we have the kind of support from the international community that can help to act as a bulwark against any kind of funny business from Guatemala.
This has been a long and exhaustive process. You've been in office since 2008, which makes 11 years since the compromise was signed. If there is a no vote, how do you find the energy and how do you revitalize to go back to the table and start this process anew?
Well, there's not any real process to start anew. The diplomatic outreach has always been ongoing. The fact that we had signed the compromise and we were looking to go to referendum didn't stop those efforts from continuing to be deployed by ourselves. I'm saying, though, that if there's a no vote, we'll have to redouble those efforts. But I don't see that that can be very hard to do, given, again, the stakes. We know that for the sake of Belize, for the sanctity of our borders, it is going to be all important that we continue to work the international community, and there will be no flagging of energy where that is concerned.
My final question, any regrets, any step of the way in terms of setting today as the date and in terms of what has been done leading up to today?
No, not in terms of setting today as the date. After the postponement of the April 10th date, I felt, and Cabinet agreed with me, and others to whom we spoke were of the same mind, that the quicker we do this, the better. People, I think, were already suffering from some degree of fatigue in terms of the constant bombardment with respect to the campaign, with respect to the advertising campaign from both sides. And also, given that there was a degree of uncertainty caused by the postponement, we thought it important to look, let's fix a new date, let's go there, that's the only way to really reassure people that it's happening, and you're soon going to be able to vote and to get this thing behind us and start afresh in hopefully a united fashion. Clearly, the issue has proven pretty divisive, and so certainly we continue to feel that the right thing was to go as quickly as possible so that we can pick up the pieces thereafter and get back together as one Belize, one nation, one country.
Prime Minister Dean Barrow speaking to us live from the Nazarene Primary School here on Coney Drive in Belize City. Take it away, guys.
Yeah, that was one of the early interviews with the Prime Minister as he was actually looking forward in terms of saying, you know what, we're going to be one country going forward, which is one of the big questions now. But, you know, as we look back and we try to wrap up the day, one of the big points to me was the issue of whether or not the PUP is static and had been outmaneuvered. And I want to put it in some context, if you'll allow me. When you look at the results of the municipal elections and the approach that the government took, the UDP took, in terms of what they did there, it seems that in the referendum they did the flip opposite. The focus for the municipal elections was out district, and they took a shellacking in Belize City. They seem to have reversed it in terms of the way that they distribute their resources and their targeting to do the complete opposite. They secured Belize City and Belize district, and then it trickled outside, and it did deliver the results they were. It just seems that every time the PUP and UDP get in the ring, the UDP seem to be fighting the same way, and the UDP picks up new styles, adopts new weapons. Is my perception of it, is there any sense or aspect of it that is true, that the UDP does seem to be evolving and maneuvering?
Let me say that that will require a much more deeper analysis, but the result in itself says everything. Again, we spoke earlier about message, confidence, and trust. What you saw with the United Democratic Party is that they took a position, they stood by their position, and they ran with their position. What you saw with the People's United Party is that they took a position, some half-heartedly, some came out, and some did not come out at all. So when you juxtapose the two of them again, who do you think the electorate is going to believe in? I want to believe in a process, and I want to believe in a party and a leader that I can trust to take me through this. When you want to go back to the municipal elections, the different dynamics, different issues, different personalities we were dealing with. There were some major issues that, for example, let us say in Belize City, that the Belize City electorate felt that they were better off with a city council led by current Mayor Bernard Wagner. Those issues resonated with the people at that point in time. That's a municipal issue. This is a national issue. Another thing which we need to also look at is that if you took a run, and I did a walk through Belize City, just driving around and seeing, the energy in the two camps was like night and day. So if you're not,
and there's even a lack of presence of nose at some of the polling stations.
And so to my mind, it goes back again to that issue, the trust, the confidence, and yes, there are those other factors as mobilizations. And you spoke about being outmaneuvered. Clearly they were outmaneuvered. But again, let us be mindful that that trust issue also had a tenure, because it's an issue, this was a whole issue that the former Prime Minister, Right Honorable Said Musa, often said, and which he stood by, a process started by the PUP, started by the former Prime Minister. And so that trust issue, that confidence, who do you go with? There is some, I think the trust, the issue was also one that gave people some safety and security in terms that this is the alternative. If you recall, and I brought it up, I think yesterday, when the Prime Minister spoke, because he, of course, was doubtful. I think we were all unsure. Everybody was uncertain. This is a new waters that we are chartering. And if you recall, the Prime Minister has said that, you know, he appealed to the Belizean people. His last message was, all right, you may not even like the United Democratic Party. You may not like, you may have an issue with us, but rise above that. That is what he asked the Belizean people to do. In other words, sift out, yes, there are many flaws with the processes that we saw unearthed, the legal challenge that went through, issues with vital statistics, issue of the diaspora being not allowed to vote, because the short process in which we move from the re-registration to an actual referendum, the messaging, the resources that was pumped into this. So there were a lot of other issues, but the Belizean people said, you know, I am able to put those on the back burner because this issue is more important, you know, in terms of materially weighing it.
What is the impact?
And I want it, and I know
what is the impact. What is the impact of the absence? Because we're at the beginning of a process.
The absence of?
What is the importance of the absence of the Prime Minister, the Honorable Dean Barrow, throughout the rest of this process, because he will not be at the steering wheel.
Yes, definitely.
And so what will be the impact of him not being at the helm?
Well, that is going to be, that's a very interesting question, because you may now see that in the next general elections.
Yeah.
And the leader that is going to rise, rather within the United Democratic Party, whether the Belizean people is going to have the confidence in that leader to continue this process, or whether they are going to turn to the People's United Party and said, we are more prepared to allow you to take us to the next step.
One of the questions I wanted to ask was, clearly, when you gave the differentiation between where the UDP position came from and how the Prime Minister solidified it very early. First with saying voter conscience, and then we heard a clear yes. What do you think was the impact of the leader of the opposition having first a yes position and then conforming to a no after his listening tour?
I think the uncertainty then puts doubts in people's mind as to whether to what the position is and how we can trust the party to continue with a position. Whatever we may want to say, yes, you changing your mind is a personal choice. The leader of the opposition. It's
part of leadership too.
Yes, it's part of the leadership. And if you're leading a party, the right thing to do is to follow the mandate of the party. And I think he did the right thing by following the mandate of the party.
Misled though, because I think if we look
I would want to say misled.
Let me just qualify what I'm saying, because if we look at the results in Stan Creek, the results part of the results in Cayo, which were the groups that put together the first solid no position, they were saying their constituents wanted no, but that was not what was reflected in the results.
Well, if you come out of the South, it was reflected in Toledo.
Yes.
That was clear.
So that's
affected in the North. Affected in the North.
I'm saying the first group that stepped forward with the
where it clearly wasn't as strong was in Belize City and Belize District. And the United Democratic Party recognized that. And that is their strong, and they have a stronghold within that. But again, Marlene and Kevin, trust, confidence. People want to connect and link because I want to trust you. And in this particular issue, clearly they trust the leadership of the Prime Minister on this. Now, whether they will continue to trust the United Democratic Party with an inevitable change in leadership is going to be another issue.
And let's not forget strategy. And that's my last question. Just when we started yesterday, we were looking very detailed at the number of voters in each area, because it was going to be the aggregate or the total sum that was going to matter the most. So where you have the largest concentration of voters, strategically it would have been better to focus your efforts there.
Exactly.
Do you think that there was perhaps a better strategy in where the focus was for the yes vote that pushed this through?
I don't get
in being able to get the higher numbers in total?
Their strategy played out. They focused their efforts, to my mind, on where the aggregate voters were, because that was what it boiled down to. It doesn't mean, of course, that the other constituencies, that there were not effort that was placed in all these other constituencies, because it all go back to, again, because let us look at Cayo, right? There were 6 constituencies in Cayo, 4 carried the yes vote. Now, what may have been surprising to them may be the ones that did not carry the yes vote, like the Cayo West. In Cayo North, where Michelle Shivat led the no platform, that carried. But what you would have seen was he was much more visible on the ground, in the media, both in the social media, in the traditional media. He was on the ground carrying through his platform.
Yeah.
You know, so where you saw that, then you saw the manifestation of that in the results.
I don't want to defend the leader of opposition, but if you look at what he saw on the ground based on the results of the referendum, 50% of the people that he saw in Corozal was telling him no.
Yes.
50% of the people in Orijua were telling him no. 50% of the people in Cayo was basically telling him no, because you had 2 out of there.
Two out of 6.
2 out of 6, but you had 2 very solid. And then of the south, one of the 2 districts, 50% of the 2 districts, Toledo and Sand Creek, were telling him no.
Yes.
So on the mean, that was what he was hearing.
And that's it.
Based on the results.
That is quite an explanation then.
Yeah.
And I guess it's
we don't have to give them. They'll explain now. Their job is to explain.
Go back to this. You cannot fault the leader of the opposition for taking a position as mandated by the party. Perhaps what one could say is that maybe the discourse or the conversation maybe was not to the extent that the other conversation of the yes vote, the YS may not have had that would have included those both platforms. Maybe that could have been an issue as well, but maybe not. But he followed through. He followed through on what his party said to him to do, and he did.
I think that there will be a lot of this kind of explanation that will come. We expect to hear from him, of course, and we are going to be hearing from the Prime Minister early today. What we can say at 55% to, is it 43?
55 to 44.
44%.
With a 0.8 vote.
But
it is a clear yes,
the PUP were playing,
but not.
Yeah, the PUP were playing checkers, and clearly the government was playing chess. That is the best final.
Well, you were right in saying that. You were right in saying, from a political standpoint, that the PUP was outmaneuvered. But this is the game and nature of politics.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, what the People's United Party has to now do, go back to the drawing board, sit back, reflect, be honest in that self-reflection as to what transpired, and then how does one move forward. Well, however, moving forward must recognize that the people have decided and that the majority of the people, by a 10% margin, have decided that they want to take this matter
and
to
that
the
was my
ICJ.
point. I think it is a clear majority, not such a great gap that you feel that you are outnumbered, but sufficient enough to say that it's a clear message from the people saying this is the step that needs to be taken.
And the Prime Minister also has to be mindful that there is 44% of the populace that said no. So the Prime Minister must now reach out to that 44% so that we can build a kind of national unity. We've crossed the step. Build a national unity that is going to be required to take us into the next chapter.
And I think that
of the history of Belize.
The best message to close off on, because that's really, I think, where we should start today. But thank you, Carolyn. It was a long day yesterday.
Belize will miss you.
And
where am I going?
We are grateful for your analysis this morning and for sharing with us just some of the numbers that we've received so far. But thank you once again.
You are welcome, my dear.
We're going to go ahead and take a break, and we'll be back in a few. Stay tuned.